Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to our Mythbusters webinar part 2. Today we are going to be debunking LLC myths around cost, complexity, aesthetics, and demand. And I'm really excited for this session. We have some great information here for you today, along with our amazing presenters, John Wilson and Nikki DeLuna. And before we, hi John, hi Nikki. And John, if you want to move it to the next slide, then I just want to, before we dive into some of our content, I just want to make sure, I'm sure you're all aware of this, but if you haven't visited betterbricks.com recently, this is our program website. We have a lot of information that we have been adding to this and incorporating in. So make sure you check that out. And as much as we all love lighting and lighting controls and a lot of lighting geeks in the room today, we do also have other technologies as well. And we put a link in there, other technologies that Better Bricks works on. So I would definitely encourage you to take a look at the site. And I'm happy to be able to introduce today's speakers. Our first speaker I want to introduce is John Wilson. If you don't know John, he's been in the lighting and utility industry for many years, almost 20 years experience working in energy efficiency and market transformation. He is the founding director of Fernhill's Shopworks. It's a boutique consulting firm in Portland, Oregon. And on his personal time, John enjoys camping, fishing, and solving the mystery of how to make lighting controls easier for everyone. Yeah, something that that's a commonality we share, John, in our spare time. And then we're really excited also to have Nikki be able to join us today. So Nikki DeLuna, she is a passionate lighting professional with over 13 years experience. She's with Rab Lighting, and she works on supporting designers, engineers, contractors, and users with luminaire level lighting control technology. Her official title is the Product Marketing Associate, sorry, Nikki, at Rab Lighting. And she really focuses on network lighting controls and making lighting easy. And I personally have been fortunate enough to sit through a presentation that Nikki did, and she has excellent experience, technical expertise. So we're just very excited to have her on today as well. And with that, I will let you take it away.
Yeah, thanks so much, Angela, for the warm welcome, and thanks, Nikki, for joining me today, and thanks to all of you for joining. I just kind of looked over at the attendees list, and fun to see some familiar names, and also fun to see so many folks I haven't met before. So appreciate you making time and joining us today. So this is the second Mythbusters, LLLC Mythbusters, and yeah, I think it behooves us to set the table and talk about why are we still doing this, right? And I in particular, I am kind of relishing this moment because I don't mind sharing with this group a little personal confession. I myself am a convert. I went from being deeply skeptical about this technology when I started working with it several years ago to really getting on board. And so these, busting these LLC myths, it really resonates. And the need for this is because the technology has evolved and the market conditions have evolved. And many of these, the myths that persist, they have a modicum of truth in them, or they were at one point true. But at this point, having worked with this initiative personally for, gosh, close to like 10 years, it feels like, which is crazy. I can say at this point, LLC really outperforms the competition. And so, yeah, it's worth revisiting these and talking about them. And I'm looking forward to this. So the way we're going to get into this today, we've got a little myth-busting journey. We've actually identified 10 myths, and we've come up with 5 categories that will take us across our little journey here. We're going to talk about the design phase. We'll talk about 2 myths in the installation phase. We'll have 2 for the operational phase. And then we'll talk about the IT and the customer experiences. These are kind of 2 really important stakeholder groups that maybe have an outsized impact, either in their say, what they need, and how how specification is written, and just and how the life cycle advantages of LLC play out. So this is how we're going to, this is how we've structured our myths today. And without further ado, I am going to jump right in to our first myth. So starting in the design phase, myth number 1, luminaire level lighting controls only make sense in new construction applications. So what are the origins of this myth? Well, in the past, there was some truth to that, right? There were fewer LLLC fixtures and especially retrofit options on the market. There was a higher cost for those LLLC fixtures versus their, non-integrated cousins. And it's also true, just, we should highlight there was more networking cost and complexity in the past. The reason this one matters so much is that when we limit LLLC to only new construction, it's just a massive missed opportunity. Some folks work predominantly, if you're in the spec market, you might do a lot more new construction, but renovation projects abound. And we're all aware that, the majority of buildings out there are the existing ones, not the new ones going up. So only applying or thinking LLLC makes sense in new construction just creates a huge missed opportunity. And Nikki will talk to us about today's reality.
Yeah, so with today's reality, I mean, controls are really kind of everywhere now. We've got more than 50 different LLLC systems that are on the market, and all these different types of manufacturers that are out there. Everybody's kind of making some version of a retrofit kit or some way to kind of retrofit those existing systems that are out there, whether it's a fluorescent system or even if your customer already has LED. There's now systems that you can kind of be able to just kind of retrofit those existing LEDs to be able to still be an LLLC fixture, to be able to kind of utilize those systems. Having the mesh systems themselves, having the reliability of those mesh networks, and just the capabilities with them without having to really kind of network any additional hardware, add additional kind of components throughout, which makes it much more cost effective for customers now than it once was. So just being able to have that LLC retrofit opportunities is available. Definitely don't restrict it to new construction because there's so many different opportunities with retrofits, regardless of what type of fixture you have, to be able to convert it to an LLLC enabled fixture and have a lot more flexibility and kind of value added in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Nikki. And I just want to highlight that last one. This concept of, coming from the utility industry in particular, where we were really pushing the need for redesigning spaces in existing buildings. And what we ran into, that kind of was a quixotic pursuit because doing a space redesign added so much cost and time to a project. It just wasn't realistic, we found, in the vast majority of cases. But with LLLC, it enables one-for-one retrofits and change outs of existing fixtures, but because of the versatility and the flexibility of LLLC, you can still have highly customized spaces that similar to doing a space redesign, but you don't have to change the layout. So that's just another advantage that makes it worthwhile. Okay, myth number 2, a gateway is required to meet scheduling and code requirements. So the origins of the myth, this is a great one. This is I love that we're talking about the origins here because this used to be 100% true. So people could be forgiven for believing that, right? Currently, gateways are still required for select advanced capabilities, including resetting time clocks. We'll actually touch on this one a little bit more throughout. And many systems that require gateways utilize them for scheduling requirements. So the reason this one matters is that adding a gateway to your system, it just inherently adds cost and complexity. Gateway is not a bad word. It's not something that we should, always avoid at all costs. But it's just important to highlight that it does add cost and a level of complexity. So many installers and operators, IT professionals prefer to avoid that if possible. And it is possible now. Well, I'm stealing Nikki's thunder. Hold on. Let me go to the next slide. Nikki, tell us why we don't need a gateway for scheduling.
So the majority of manufacturers now are kind of enabling their systems to be able to have some type of programmable timer or some type of schedule that can be set wirelessly. So meaning you're not necessarily having to have that gateway. You don't need to have something, some dedicated time clock necessarily. It's within the system and how everything's communicating with each other, and just how, whatever technology, whether it's Bluetooth or cellular or Wi-Fi, how all of them are kind of getting that information on the individual devices, rather than requiring to have sort of that individualized gateway that's communicating to all the fixtures within the system. Now, each basically fixture, because it's an LLC fixture, it basically has its own brains, and so it has its own clock, it has its own scheduling capabilities, without requiring that dedicated gateway or anything like that. And in the event of any kind of power outage, the devices are also able to have sort of this kind of system be able to come back on without losing any of that programming. There are additional devices that can be added on to continuously expand your systems, but it's not necessarily required depending on what kind of features it is that you're looking for.
Yeah, thanks. That's excellent. And this is maybe a good, I'll just pause here to share with folks. If people have questions, this is one, I was just at the North American ESCO conference with friend of the show, Bruce Hemmelman, probably joining us today. And this topic came up several times talking to people, throughout the industry. This is newer technology, this ability to do programmable scheduling without a gateway. This is really starting to percolate up. It's available with many systems, but there's a lot of folks who aren't aware of it, which is why I think it's really great to highlight in a webinar like today. And this is also a good chance just to share with folks, if you have questions about any of these myths, please just use the chat, put them in the chat, and we're going to make sure we have time at the end to address those. So if any one of these resonates or you want to go back into it, please use the chat feature, and Angela will help document those, and we'll get back to them. Okay, myth number 3. So we're shifting now to the installation phase. Wireless communication is unreliable and difficult to troubleshoot. Boy, we kind of truncated 2 myths into one for this, but they go hand in hand. It's very common that we hear these together. So the origins of this myth, well, again, it's worth just highlighting that in the past, yeah, a lot of that was true. Like, people did experience wireless communication issues. There were reliability issues. And in particular, it was a challenge when devices maybe dropped off a network. It was hard to troubleshoot them. I mean, you basically had to completely go in and reset the device and completely re-add it in, and that was cumbersome, and it wasn't easy, and it wasn't always clear what was going on. One of the other origins of this myth, from experience, I believe also comes from the fact that it's easy. Some people conflate wireless communication with battery powered. So there are folks who have legit concerns about battery powered devices, and sometimes, oftentimes the maintenance that comes along with that. And, wireless communication is distinct and separate from battery powered. But when you use the word wireless, sometimes folks just automatically conflate those two things. And so you'll be talking about wireless technology and people will say, I don't want batteries. I don't want to have to deal with batteries. And that's kind of its own separate conversation, but it's worth just highlighting it's 2 separate things. So why does this one matter? Well, wireless technology, more specifically, being able to leverage wireless technology and deploy it, it's really what is saving on labor and maintenance costs. It's enabling the system flexibility. That's going to be a real theme throughout this presentation. It's a theme whenever we're talking about the values of luminaire level lighting controls. And then one of my favorite things, it preserves design intent. And so that's, as things come up during install, there's always as-built conditions are a little different than how you drew things up on paper. Having wireless technology, leveraging wireless technology is able to keep the system design intent intact, even though little things about the layout might need to change. So Nikki, talk to us about the reality today.
Yeah, so the reality today is that, the way that things have kind of progressed and how technology has progressed, specifically with wireless communication, has just significantly improved just over the last few years. Me personally, even though I'm, deal with lighting all the time and lighting controls all the time in my current role and the previous roles, it really didn't get easy for me, if you will, probably within the last 4 or 5 years. And that's just because of the way the technology has really kind of blossomed and grown. So you don't necessarily have to be this sort of controls expert to be able to enable these sort of wireless systems. And having the flexibility, just like John was saying, kind of having those flexibilities to be able to adjust and, in the field as is, rather than having to, now I have to replace this fixture and I have to go get this other fixture because it needs this feature in it, or it needs that, or I need to replace this dimmer because it's not compatible with these fixtures. It's a lot of things that are now able to just get programmed directly in the app itself for compatibility sake. And then we also have a lot more mesh networks. The mesh networks themselves are also very stable and everything. You've got mesh networks that you're actually able to now pair devices using that mesh network. So you're able to pair multiple devices rather than some of the more traditional kind of older systems. You're pairing one device at a time, one fixture at a time. So it can kind of add on to that labor time, those labor costs. So being able to use things like the mesh networks where everything is sending and receiving messages to each other just kind of speeds up the overall process, not only the pairing process, but also just kind of the general programming, commissioning of your systems. Like I said, you don't have to be that controls expert anymore. It's literally, in most cases, you're opening up an app or some other kind of platform to be able to quickly and easily communicate with all of these devices. And then additionally, troubleshooting is much, much easier now. Like I said, that wireless communication, it's going to give you that information in the app if something's wrong. And then you can also, easily kind of troubleshoot some of the basics within your system itself without having to bring in any additional or kind of paying any of those additional fees to have somebody come on site to be able to troubleshoot anything. So this is really just kind of significant. And because of the way that wireless communication has grown, it's just made it so much easier for the average person, not necessarily the contractor, distributor, designer, even just an end user alone. It's a lot easier for them to learn these systems as well and kind of understand the benefits of it.
Yeah, that's great, Nikki. Thank you. And on that, I feel like we can never take enough time to just talk about wireless communication is secure. That's one of the most common places where it's not necessarily pushback, but people maybe they pause. And the list of projects that we've seen and documented, from government facilities to credit card payment processing, buildings, that the wireless communication has been deployed. It is secure, and it is a trusted and reliable way to manage your lighting system and enjoy all these benefits, especially the flexibility and the ease of use. And we're just not running into cybersecurity issues at all as a result of deploying the wireless technology side. So that will be another sort of motif that's woven throughout this presentation, but wanted to hit on it while we were on myth number 3.
Another thing to kind of note to that with security is UL. For those customers that really kind of want that added confirmation that wireless, communication is secure, UL has, what is it? I think it's 2900-01. Basically, it's a protocol where they're testing for any kind of malware, any weaknesses, anything like that within the system. So it kind of just adds that additional layer to it. If those customers are looking for that, there are some systems that are out there that have been tested and have that UL 2900-01 rating as well.
Nice. Okay, installation myth number 4. Individual sensors in every fixture means every luminaire acts autonomously, and system setup is cumbersome. So what's the origins of this myth? Well, there's kind of 2 things going on. As we talked about this one as a team, we identified 2 origins. So this is kind of a classic. It's like, yep, in the past, yeah, like especially with older NLC systems, the setup was time consuming and cumbersome. You were really restricted in, even though it was a networked system, even if you had a true networked system, you were restricted in how many devices. You basically had to add devices one at a time. And it was still restricted in terms of like how many devices you could program at once. So that's probably half of why that myth is with us. And then the other one is, folks, it's easy to conflate if you don't work with this technology often, or even if you do, it's easy to conflate or confuse that there is a very similar looking technology solution out there that we would call standalone embedded controls that are not networked at all. So there are fixtures that have embedded controls in them, but are non-networked. And when that is the case, they are acting autonomously, and you are limited to only setting them up one at a time. And so sometimes people see that and they say, oh, it's got a set, the fixture's got a sensor in it. It must be luminaire level lighting controls. But like luminaire level lighting controls are inherently networked. And so you're not running into that issue. So why does this one matter? Well, we kind of touched on it, especially for setup and zoning capabilities. Those are just critical for meeting customer needs, achieving design intent, and making that system setup go smoothly. So this one really matters because it really affects how people perceive, how difficult is it going to be for me to set this system up or do maintenance on it. So Nikki, talk to us about the reality today.
Yeah, so the reality, all of the LLC systems are networked by definition, just like John was saying. So they're capable of zoning the fixtures kind of in a myriad of configurations. It enables installers to really complete that system programming at a group or zone level rather than working on it individually. And then it doesn't require that system operator stand directly beneath each light. So again, they're just kind of holding, their phone in their hand or a tablet or having, their laptop, and they're programming everything directly from that. And typically, depending on the system, there's going to be a kind of a default one or the other. As you pair devices with sensors, they're all going to be grouped together. So one sensor, even if you have 100 sensors in a room, they're all going to work as one, unless you choose to set them individually or kind of move it around. And another thing I think in the past is that there was always this sort of adder for having an integrated sensor in your fixture. That's really not necessarily happening too much with manufacturers. We're seeing a lot more manufacturers have just kind of their fixtures or panels, whatever it is, are automatically integrated with a sensor. And they're not even offering fixtures without the sensor because the sensor can now be disabled directly from the app or the platform. And so, as a contractor or designer, you don't want to waste your time. Your time is worth more than you spending the time trying to figure out which area should have a sensor, which shouldn't. Get everything with a sensor, and you're doing all the programming directly from the app. Save yourself some time on the front end and the back end, and just get those, fully integrated systems so you have that flexibility within those wireless platforms.
Love it. Okay, moving on to the operational phase now. Myth number 5, additional networked devices increases system complexity. So this is another one that really is rooted in truth from the past. In the past, network lighting controls had restrictions on the number of devices which could be connected before additional networking hardware was required. So this is, you would see when you were looking at a system, if you were kind of browsing cut sheets or just on their websites, it would say something like up to 200 devices before you have to add a hub or a bridge, up to 500 devices before you have to add a gateway device. So yeah, why does it matter? Well, again, we just should recognize the truth and the fact that like when you have to add networking hardware, there is a cost and a level of complexity to that. That's not nothing. So this one absolutely is rooted in truth. This especially used to be the case pre-mesh networks. And Nikki, talk to us today about the reality.
Yeah, so today, just being able to have those mesh networks really gives us the opportunity to be able to connect so many more devices. I mean, you can do hundreds of thousands without a gateway at this point. As far as the total number of connected devices without additional hardware, it's still non-finite. There's limitations that are system specific. But for the most part, because that mesh network, again, because they're all talking and sending and receiving messages to each other, each individual device, fixture, dimmer, lamp, whatever it might be, it just gives us that capability to really kind of expand it further and further without adding that additional kind of huge cost of a gateway or other kind of system hardware to be able to expand the quantity of fixtures. Now we're adding a gateway to really expand the features that are being offered within that system. Not every single project needs backnet integration, for example. So we don't necessarily need that gateway to do that backend integration. We can do all of that within that mesh network with Bluetooth or cellular or whatever it might be. We have that capability now within those systems to make them a lot more cost effective.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'll just highlight when I was just down at the NAESCO conference, and I was talking about these with some of our colleagues and different market actors down there. So I talked to a gentleman, I believe he was with McWong. We were talking about a 6-story office building they did in Minnesota, and with LLLC and with mesh networks, you have a high enough concentration of nodes that in that instance, they were able to expand the network throughout the entire building. He said they had over 1,000 devices, and they didn't need to add a gateway. So if they wanted, like you were saying, Nikki, if they wanted to do the building integration, or BMS, or if they wanted to have remote access or connectivity between different buildings, then they might have had to do that. But within that single 6-story building, over 1,000 devices, and that to me was just an awesome example of how this myth has been busted. Yeah, as long as you're not requiring additional features.
Yep.
Okay, number 6. The best way to satisfy tenants is to provide everyone with maximum control and custom options. That one's, if that felt a little cringe, it was meant to. And this is like, what's the origin of this? I kind of just want to jump down to, I feel like this turns into just because we can means that we should. I think there's an impulse because user interfaces, we're offering more options. This was something we were saying, hey, there's an app, just you can change it. The app makes it really easy, and these wall stations are programmable. Go for it. You can make it whatever you want. So why does this one matter so much? We spend a lot of time. Everybody who's on this webinar understands the importance of you need to solicit input from the stakeholders, whether it's the operational, from the facilities people to the tenants, even the building owner. You need to get input on how the lighting system should work, and that is critical to informing a sequence of operations. But if you start giving everybody, it's like too many cooks in the kitchen. You could have the best, Cook's Illustrated recipe that you're working from, but if everybody starts trying to customize it, it's just going to turn into like a kindergarten Play-Doh session. So Nikki, talk to us about the reality of this one today.
Yeah, so the reality is, today's systems are a lot more functional and flexible than ever before. So, just like John said, just because you have all this extra flexibility, and you can give every single person individual control because the system has that functionality to be able to program it that way, doesn't necessarily mean it's the best way. I actually was just talking to a customer, I think a couple of weeks ago on a site project. They were saying that, a lot of folks came back to or they're now hybrids. They're kind of half in the office, half out. Some folks are really trying to push that the lights are too bright. And so the maintenance staff, they have to, if they're fluorescents, they're having to come out and pull tubes out or do something to be able to try to mitigate this light for this particular person at their desk. So rather than now, they're upgrading to an LLLC fixture with a wireless control system, rather than giving that person individual control, that maintenance staff person just now has control. They can go over to that desk and they can adjust that light level directly in their app or their platform. So it makes it much easier for the facilities folks. So just like John was saying, like talk to the facilities folks, find out what their needs are, what the needs are of the building. You're not just kind of going in and saying, hey, I've got this great control system. It's going to work perfect for you. Really kind of dive in and find out what is it that they're doing in this space? How are they currently working with their lights? And then find ways on how those control systems can easily help them sort of mitigate some of their struggles or improve and kind of reduce time that maintenance staff and those facilities folks are spending there. You have the capabilities that comes with the temptation of giving everybody what they want because, all right, here, I'll just give you this remote or this dimmer switch or, access to the app to be able to control your lights. But now, again, too many cooks in the kitchen, more room to be able to kind of create errors, create inflexibility from what is already happening, what was kind of originally set, what the facilities had kind of decided what the settings were going to be. Now individual people have control. They can adjust different things or possibly create situations where maybe those weren't the desired outcome, and now somebody has to come back and fix it, whether it's that facilities person or somebody, the contractor, whomever it is that has to now come back and fix it. Just being able to have that flexibility doesn't necessarily mean you want to give it everywhere. And then finally, what's this last? Operates best when adhering to well-informed SOO, so those sequence of operations for spaces and applications. Like I said, just really kind of dive in and figure out what it is that facility or that application is really needing and looking for in order to be able to apply it best and make it easiest to be able to manage over a long-term period.
Yeah, listening to you share that, Nikki, I'm recalling a gentleman with Jarvis Lighting, Kirby Corco. I heard him in Illinois earlier this year. I just loved what he said. He talked about approaching this with from a change management perspective. The people like a lot of times we, the advocates, we know these benefits, we know what's great about it. But there's this impulse to rush to solve everybody's problems, or when the system changes, people will have a reaction. But this idea of this change management approach, let people in the space know what happened, manage their expectations, give them time to adjust and understand how the system works, and not just having a sort of knee-jerk reaction to, oh, you don't like this, let me change it for you right now. You don't like this in this office, let me change it for you right now. Give things time to settle in, figure out what's working, work with folks to understand the change, as opposed to just because you can, rushing to make these changes everywhere, because that ultimately can create a lot more issues. As you were talking, Nikki, I was thinking about having, you got 2 or 3 kids sitting on the sofa and they've all got a different remote control, but they're all watching one television. It's you can see how that's going to cause some issues there. Okay. Moving on to our next category, the IT experience. Myth number 7, lighting networks are connected to corporate networks. This one needs a silver steak because it just won't die. We need garlic and a cross to really get rid of this one. So yeah, what are the origins of this? Well, I talking about it with the team, modern NLC systems, they are capable of integrating with other building systems and networks, and they do so routinely. So that's kind of, I think, the first one. Because networks can connect to other networks, that, I think, for a lot of folks, it just makes it easy to confuse, oh, well, all my emails and files are on a corporate network, and lighting systems are on a network, and they must be the same network. So it's easy. There's a misunderstanding and a conflating here of those 2 points. And the reason this one matters is because increasingly, the threat and the reality of cyber attacks is just grown exponentially in the last, forget the last decade, the last 5 years. Anybody who's paying for cyber insurance, they'll tell you. So correspondingly, companies are coming out and adopting and adhering to really specific and informed cybersecurity protocols. And they place an emphasis on keeping systems isolated and secure. So if there was an IT professional and they heard somebody say, yeah, it's a networked lighting system, luminaire level lighting controls, it's inherently networked, and yeah, it's networked and it's on the system. Whose system? Not the corporate system. They're going to raise a red flag, and rightfully so, and want to understand exactly what you mean. So what's the reality today, Nikki?
Yeah, so today's systems are designed to operate as independent networks that are isolated and restricted. So they're not getting on the corporate network or anything like that. So you've got your systems that are using things like Bluetooth mesh, where it's all Bluetooth, so you're not having to worry about any kind of Wi-Fi connection. There's also systems that utilize a cellular connection. So it's using a cellular-based system. Again, no need to be able to connect to the network. You're not having to worry about any of that integration. The systems are capable of integrating with other networks, such as the HVAC or BMS systems. But it's the capability, again, just because it's capable, you don't necessarily have to implement that portion to be able to have to connect to the network or anything like that. And then you got the systems that are compliant with modern cyber certifications and capable of meeting the IT cyber protocols to make sure that it's safe, it's secure, you know, it's not going to get hacked or anything like that, or worry about getting it onto the corporate network and then mixing information or anything or servers. So it's all set up kind of to be able to have that cybersecurity and give the end user sort of that safety and comfortability of it.
And Nikki, you talked about earlier, you mentioned as an example, the UL cyber certification that's out there. And there's like a dozen of them. I mean, there's a whole bunch of them that are out there. One of the features I use most regularly when this comes up with people, I refer them to the Design Lights Consortium on their network lighting controls, QPL. It's a required, they list it, what the cyber certification is that they've adopted. And different companies may adopt different ones for their own reasons. That's why we don't have just like one blanket universal one. But they all share a lot of similarities. And yeah, they govern things exactly. I mean, it's like, you know, when you set up the system, the password can't just be password and it can't just remain password. You've got to come up with a actual login security. It's stuff like that, right? And it governs things all the way down to user admin rights and yeah, everything to make sure the systems stay secure. And if they're not isolated, because there are plenty of applications and projects where it makes sense where we do want to have systems integrate, making sure that's done in a way that's consistent and adheres to existing cyber protocols. Okay, we're doing great here on time. The IT experience, myth number 8, lighting networks require gateway devices. There's that gateway word again. So, origins of the myth, well, in the past, this was often the case, especially when expanding network reach and providing key capabilities. So it used to be, if you just had, you know, devices that were only within a room together, well, they could talk to each other with radio signals, but if you wanted to expand to the entire floor of a building, you were going to need some sort of gateway device. Not even for HVAC or BMS integration, not even for remote system access. This used to be a significant limiting factor. If you wanted to expand your expand your network outside an individual room, like a classroom or private offices, you needed a gateway device to tie it all together. And the other reason this myth probably persists, we've been hitting on this throughout, gateways are still required for select, you know, I'm calling them advanced capabilities here because in a whole bunch of projects, you don't need them. So, you know, whether they're advanced or not is kind of a relative term. It's more project specific. But when you need things like remote access or systems integration or demand response, you still do need a gateway for that. And so I think that's the reason this myth persists with us today. It's not just the fact that it was true to a large degree in the past. It's that for many features, you still need a gateway. And then why does it matter? We've talked about this one already. That gateway, it costs money, and oftentimes you need more than one. And adding a gateway does add a level of complexity to any project. And so it's something that installers, operators, specifiers are definitely paying attention to. So Nikki, talk to us about the reality today.
Yeah, so reality kind of goes back to, because we're using these mesh networks, it's allowing all of these individual devices to have kind of, again, sort of their own brains in each individual device so that they're able to communicate within this mesh, extend those ranges and kind of system capabilities between each other. So because they're utilizing this mesh network, as long as they're spaced within their dedicated range of each other, it continues to extend that range further and further out. So unlike kind of some gateway systems where your gateway also not only is limited by the number of devices that are added to it, but some of them also have a limitation on how far they can be away from these devices. So some of it's kind of distance limitations. And so having those mesh networks really kind of helps to expand that. You're able to meet a majority of the code requirements without any kind of dedicated gateway because, like I said before, just like John had mentioned, you don't necessarily need all of the additional kind of advanced features or protocols of those systems. You just need sort of the basics, if you will. And you can do all of that without having any kind of dedicated gateway device on your system, and then be able to leverage the app-based configuration tools where you're kind of limited and have that on-site gateway functionality to be able to kind of maximize those things as well.
Yeah, awesome. It's worthwhile. I just like to point out to people, because a lot of times in the context of lighting, when we're use the word gateway, we're thinking about that, and this is what it is in the conventional sense. We're thinking about that like dedicated piece of network hardware that lives on site. Your tablet, like our smartphones, those are gateway devices. And so with these modern mesh systems that we keep referencing, when you sign into the app on site, your tablet becomes the gateway for that system while you are logged in to the app. And it is what is capable of going between like grabbing updates or firmware updates from the internet and then pushing those out via Bluetooth to the system. And so that's the difference. Our smartphones, our tablets, those are gateways, but it's a significantly different use and approach than when you have when the system requires that dedicated on-site piece of networking hardware in the form of a gateway to expand the range, or because you're limited in the number of devices before you have to add that piece. Okay, home stretch, the last category, the customer experience. So myth number 9. Boy, this is one we've all heard, and it just kind of keeps getting repeated. Customers want the cheapest solution. What's the origins of the myth? Well, we know, again, there is a modicum of truth. People don't want to pay for the most expensive thing out there, right? And in the past, LLLC products were more expensive, especially if you were just looking at a fixture basis, than their less integrated cousins. And currently, value engineering, it's still an issue that persists. And this one's really funny, because we actually see people where luminaire level lighting controls becomes the VE solution, which I just think is great, especially when it can get in as the VE solution because it doesn't require a gateway. But we still see a lot of instances, and we hear from specifiers and installers where they say, sometimes a very robust lighting system has been specified, and yeah, by the time in the construction process that they're getting to lighting, there's been so many cost overruns in other places. They're saying, hey, pull this out. The customer just needs the cheapest lighting solution. That LLLC, especially if they're just looking at the fixture basis, it appears to be too expensive. So why does this matter? Well, if you're just selling on price alone, we just know from so many examples that's going to increase the likelihood of a negative customer experience. It's promoting the least functional technology. Overall, it's increasing the lifecycle costs, especially because maintenance goes up, and the cost if you ever need to rezone a space goes up. And then this one, it's a little selfish to like the contractors and the people doing the work, but it limits profitability. I think this really matters for contractors. I don't know a single contractor who's like, I love selling TLEDs because I'm just making so much money selling them. It's been a race to the bottom for the last 5 years. And it's just, it's not a sustainable business model. So talk to us about the realities today.
Yeah, so the reality is that customers are wanting to be able to have that value, and routinely are kind of referring back to reduced operating costs, system flexibility, ease of use, and low maintenance. LLLC controls can really handle and touch all of these. First of all, adding controls, you're getting some automatic savings. One, if you're doing an LED from maybe fluorescent or incandescent, automatically getting that savings, then you're adding controls to it. Having the ability to set things like schedules, utilize things like occupancy sensing, daylight harvesting, things like high-end trim is also a really great way to be able to extend the life of your LEDs and kind of offer that additional safety net. The flexibility that you have with having the wireless communication and kind of having that app-based control again, kind of going and the facilities folks can make adjustments wherever there is needs after kind of living in that space for a little bit. Oh, I don't need these lights at 100%. Maybe I just need them at 80%. And then kind of mimicking that, going to different areas, figuring out what works best for each area, rather than just having an LED upgrade or a light upgrade, and you're just kind of trying to figure out, well, what do I do now? Now my bill, my electric bill is XYZ, and I don't know how to lower it now because I don't have controls on it. So kind of adding controls just really kind of continuously adds that value for the customer to continuously evolve. And then with some systems, they will also have, just like John had mentioned, kind of these firmware updates where they're updating the firmware on that individual device. So that firmware update is typically actually offering, in some cases, will offer some additional features or new features on that device. So the customer no longer has to go and invest in new hardware. They're just updating the firmware for their existing devices and being able to continuously add value to their systems and continuously grow their systems with the growth of their company or with their home, whatever application it might be. But having that flexibility and that wireless communication, firmware updates, it really kind of hits all of these points and can really kind of go to really kind of convincing a customer to understand the value of what they're purchasing. And so the price might be a little bit high right now, but it's the overall outcome that they're getting, the lower maintenance that they're getting. They're not having to get up on ladders quite as often or on lifts quite as often because everything is wireless control, and a majority of things can be taken care of on the ground directly with an app or with some other platform, just communicating, having that wireless communication. So again, it's really just kind of discussing with that customer, how is it that they're using their lighting today? What are they doing? They have 3 shifts going on. How are lights turning on and off? Where are things happening? And being able to kind of integrate the things that you know about the systems that you're selling and being able to kind of push those in with the needs of what that customer is already doing in their building. If they're manually going and turning lights off throughout the building, hey, this control system can put a schedule on it or has occupancy sensors. Finding ways to kind of pull these values that are in a control system and showing those customers how they can immediately help them in things that they're already doing or save them time in things that they're already doing so they can dedicate their time to other things that are more important to their roles within their facilities.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Nikki. It made me think, we had a quote from Adam Lopez, who's an electrical contractor with Christensen Electric, and you made me think about this, as you were describing that. He I'm going to paraphrase his quote, but he basically just said, the end users that have luminaire level lighting controls installed, they're often really pleased with the end result. And he specifically references the high-end trim feature. And it's funny because he talked about, as he was providing us with this, said, when we talked to customers about this up front, and they kind of like nod their heads like they understand, like, oh yeah, I can see how that would be nice. But it's not until they get into they move into the space, and then it's like, oh, this is too bright. And like, well, here's how easy it is. We're just going to change this now. And then people are like, oh my gosh, this is great. What else, what else can this do for us? So this is, yep. Value over the life cycle matters way more than upfront cost. And our last one, customer experience, myth number 10, customers want the simplest solution. I probably have lost track of how many times people have said, I just want the lights to work. We hear it routinely from folks. And the origins of the myth, yeah, it's because we should just recognize, I've been doing this luminaire level lighting controls thing for close to a decade. And I'll be the first to say, I feel like just NLC systems in general, they've overpromised and underdelivered. And a lot of that just has to do with the technology maturing. But I feel like I would be remiss not to address the truths that are in, that part of the myth. Setup was particularly frustrating. And part of that was that users were limited in their options for configuring. So, why does this one matter? It's pretty self-evident, but the simplest solution for most customers is the one that meets their needs. It's not the one that's the most basic. And there's such a difference between that. Basic is not necessarily meeting people's needs. So Nikki, talk to us about the reality today.
Yeah, so the reality is that LLLC is providing kind of that simplicity for being able to have that flexibility and creating that space to be able to rezone anything, kind of leveraging that wireless technology. offering multiple options for configuration to be able to have kind of meet different area needs within the same building or different spaces. And then offering a scalability framework to be able to allow kind of phased implementation. So like I said, you can always, there's some systems where you can add tens of thousands of devices because it's now utilizing this mesh network, still not requiring a gateway or anything. So you're able to start out small and then really kind of grow. The system can grow as the business grows or as the business develops or phases develop. So just kind of having the overall simplicity of everything, the simplicity of the system itself, but also the user interface of those apps or any kind of platform that they're using for their wireless control or LLC fixtures. The user interface is also a really big thing. And so we've been seeing a lot more platforms that are coming out that are much easier for the end users to really kind of understand. Like kind of going back to what I had mentioned before, you no longer have to be that controls expert. You're really able to kind of hand it off to anybody and they're able to kind of figure it out and understand it with very little instruction. So just the flexibility, that wireless technology, and just having all those options for scalability and configuration is really kind of helps out with that.
Awesome. Well, we made it through 10 and we have some time for questions. So Angela, I'll ask you, did we get any questions along the way?
Excellent. Yes, we did actually. So I'll start in order here. So myth number 3, the wireless communications was the first one. So they're saying, let's say an office building has 2 adjacent tenants. How do you avoid a lighting device connecting to the adjacent tenant's network?
Yeah, great question. Do you want to field that, Nikki?
Yeah, for sure. So with most systems, once you've paired a device, I would, if you've got 2 different sort of adjacent tenants, I would focus on tenant 1, pair their devices, power off tenant 2 if you've already had those things installed. Once you've got a device paired into your system, it's not going to get found again once you go to the adjacent tenant and you start pairing those devices. Once it's paired and set up, it's good to go unless you're physically going over to actually reset those to factory settings. So within the system, once it's grouped together, it's communicating within that individual mesh network. When you create a separate site or zone or whatever it may be, depending on the system you're using, it is now a completely separate mesh network. So mesh networks aren't crossing across tenants unless you've actually set it up that way for them to be able to cross between tenants. You can set up separate mesh networks for each location.
And I would highlight as well, I mean, just to draw a really simple example, like when you put your Bluetooth earbuds in on an airplane, you're not listening to everybody else's music. It's the same exact technology. Like once things are paired and they know who they're with, they're not going to interfere with other things. They know who they're talking to. So that's part of the initial setup process. And then it's just kind of a non-issue.
That's a great example, John. Thank you. Thanks, Nikki, for answering that. All right. The second question that we had was around myth number 5. So it was saying myth number 5 was the operational phase. The additional network devices increases system complexity. And so they were saying, do you mean that the number of devices that may be connected is still finite? So I'm hoping I'm understanding that question exactly.
Because systems have different, there's over 50 different network lighting control systems on the market. Okay, almost all of those at this point, the vast majority of those are luminaire level lighting control, offer luminaire level lighting controls. But many of them, I should say there are still differing system architectures that these systems deploy. In the most pure mesh network versions, specifically, I'm going to talk about Bluetooth mesh. Those are the ones that, in my experience, are the most unrestricted, meaning that's the example that I just got and cited from this gentleman at McWong. He said, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was over 1,000 devices without requiring additional hardware, networking hardware. But I'm also just going to say that's where the technology is going. Existing systems right now, I know there are examples of existing systems right now that are still limited. So after 500 devices, you might need to add a bridge or a hub to have control throughout the project space. So that's why I'd use the word non-finite, and I didn't want to say you're completely unlimited. It still is system specific, but it is, whereas in the past, every system had a limit and they were a lot lower, we're only seeing the ceiling go up and up, especially if you're, again, that is based on you have your nodes, whether it's in every single fixture, are in close enough proximity that it can expand the network. So that is a conditional element to that scenario.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, John. Nikki, the next one was directed to you. When you say customers want value, can you explain what type of customers you're finding want this? As we know, not all do. And on top of that, is it different for the construction versus the retrofit market?
Yeah, so there's definitely everybody. There's some customers out there that are just like, I just want my lights upgraded to LED. I don't want to worry about controls. I don't want to worry about anything else. There are other customers, once you kind of get past that kind of initial hump and kind of start really explaining to them how these controls can benefit them, they start kind of understanding, like seeing some of the values of, oh, okay, I can save energy with occupancy sensing. Okay, that's cool. It might not necessarily mean anything to them. Daylight harvesting. Okay, that's cool. But then maybe there's one of these kind of features that you mentioned where they're, oh, actually, I know that we're going to be expanding the building into this other area, and I know that they want to be able to create schedules, or there's going to actually be a lot more windows or skylights in there. So daylight harvesting would make sense over there. So it would be nice to be able to have that later once we do expand this area, to be able to enable that without having to go and get new hardware to be able to do that. Now I have these sensors or I have these devices in here that I can just go into the app and I can enable those features later on. So it's really just kind of, again, finding out what's going on with this building, with this customer, and finding ways to be able to say, hey, did you know you can do this? How about this? Oh, did you know this is also going on? So it's just being able to really listen to that customer and target it. So it doesn't matter if it's new construction or retrofit. It's, again, just kind of listening to the customer and being able to play off of what you already know about your system that you're proposing, to be able to find that value that is going to trigger them to understand a little bit more.
That's great. Thank you. I'll add to that. I had somebody that works in new construction the other day say to me, when I'm talking to my customers, they're looking at these buildings that are, at least they're expecting them, for 65-year kind of lifespan. So, you're going to be in that building a long time. You want to put the right system in. That's for sure. And we have one more question. I want to be respectful of time. So John, if you don't mind moving the slide just to our contact information, that way, folks, if you do need to jump off, you have a way to reach us. But the last question that we have that came in here is for you, John. And it said, you mentioned that NLCs have historically overpromised and underdelivered, but they've seen some positive case studies through like NIA and DLCs finding, pretty significant savings from network lighting controls. So that doesn't feel very under-delivering. So they're just asking for some context in that. Is it in certain categories like functionality, cost, savings, or for certain application or customer types?
Yeah, no, that's a great place to add a little bit of a finer point. I would sharpen the pencil and say specifically on ease of use. That's the biggest one. As somebody who is brand neutral and has worked with dozens, close to 20 of these systems, hands-on experience, setting them up and playing with them, the biggest one thing that has changed, where I feel like the companies have overpromised and underdelivered, it's on the ease of use front. I believe today with the modern apps and in many instances also remote controls, especially when that's the right fit for people, we've really cracked that nut. And we do actually have like genuine ease of use. I will say specifically, a lot of these systems, people would say it's ease of use if you're a super user. If you use that system all the time and you know that app inside and out, it's easy, but it's not easy to the average facility operator. The apps in particular have gotten so much better just in the last 3 years, I'll say. That's the area where I feel like historically these systems overpromised and underdelivered. The capabilities have been there. They do deliver on energy savings, no doubt. But I believe now the ease of use in particular is catching up and making it a more holistic value proposition.
Great. Thanks, John. Well, we're at time. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you to our amazing presenters. That was a great session, a lot of great information. We are going to be putting this session on the website at some point. Certainly reach out to our team if you'd like a copy of the slide deck as well, or if you have any questions or follow-up questions. Really appreciate your time today. Thanks, everyone, and hope you have a wonderful day.
Thanks all.
Thanks. Bye.